Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. I am back with another video for Winnie and Walter, and today we're going to be taking a look at clean and simple watercoloring. And also stay tuned to the end because I'm going to be giving you the details on a giveaway over on my blog. So I'm going to be using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens today because I wanted to keep my watercoloring fairly simple, and Zigs are traditionally really good with that. However, I did run into a couple problems, and I'll talk about those more here in a moment. I did consider redoing all of these cards with a different medium, but I decided to instead walk you through all of this and show you how you can fix issues like that. I am using the Doggone Cute with Evelin T Designs stamp set today, and boy is it ever doggone cute. It even has coordinating cutaway dies, which I think are awesome. That dog house, it just slays me. I can't get over it. I think it's darling. This would go great with the Perfect stamp set as well that I used a couple videos ago, and I'll have that link down below. I am using Arteza watercolor cardstock. I have this cut down to 4 inches by 9 inches. I wanted a pretty large card today. I'm lining up those numbers with my T ruler just there on the edge of the card panel. On one, I have it lined up on the right and the bottom. On the other card is on the left and the bottom. I am also going to be using my MST stamping tool. You don't need to do that. You could absolutely use acrylic blocks. This is just super helpful to make sure that you get your images lined up really well. So I want this little doggy here to look like he's propped himself up there on the side of his dog house, taking a peek at this butterfly flying over. So I'm kind of lining it up. Now, honestly, I probably should have made sure he was standing more on his toes, but that's fine. Once I get all of this colored in, you're not even going to notice it. I am going to be using my favorite things, Black Licorice Hybrid ink, because I am going to be watercoloring, and this is water safe or waterproof. So that's why I decided to use this. You could use any waterproof ink that you would like. You could even do this in no line coloring if you wanted to. So now that I have the little dog stamped on there, I can stamp the house. I just wanted to make sure that it was going to meet up with his little paws so it actually looks like he's leaning up against it. I don't show you the other card panel because it's pretty much the same thing. There's no masking on either of these cards. It's just super simple stamping. I'm going to get started here with my zigs, and I'm just mapping out my darkest shadow areas with the marker itself, and I'm going direct to paper because I want that concentrated color. So here's my first problem. It has been so long since I've used my zigs, and I cannot find any of my swatches. I could not remember what these colors look like once you get them wet. Now, with zigs in particular, and I'm not going to speak about other watercolors, but with zigs in particular, some of these colors, once you get them wet, they'll turn a slightly different color. Now, sometimes that's not a big deal. Sometimes I don't care for it that much. So I was just pretty much picking colors that I liked, but once I started getting them wet, I didn't care for them. So there is a way you can fix that, and if you've been following my last couple videos here, you probably won't be surprised. But in the meantime, I'll walk you through how I watercolor these to begin with if you want to just stick strictly to watercoloring. So once I had my darkest shadow areas mapped out with my marker there, I bring the water in. My brush is only slightly damp. I need just enough water to get that to spread. I start in a clean part of the image, and then I bring the water to the pigment and then allow that to spread out. It does save you quite a bit of work, because that's what zigs want to do anyways. As soon as that water touches them, there's so much pigment in them that they automatically bloom and spread out on their own. So you can save yourself a great deal of time. Plus, you can also get some really amazing and natural shadows and highlights by doing it that way. So I'm just going to let that first layer dry back for a minute or two. And my paper is not that wet. It does not need to be that wet. It just needs to be wet enough to spread it out. If you can see a pool of water on your cardstock, then you have too much. You're looking for just a nice light sheen of water. If you put down too much water, then you can pick it up with a corner of a paper towel or maybe a dry baby wipe or anything like that. Okay, so after I clean off my brush and it's full of water, I actually tap it on a paper towel at the base of the bristles. And you want to do it that way because if you dry it from the tip of the bristles onto your paper towel, then you're just simply pulling the water from the tip of the brush. There's still all that water loaded at the base of those bristles. And then as soon as you put your watercolor brush down onto your paper, all that water flows back down right onto your paper, and then you end up with too much water. Just like that. So I didn't have enough of that water pulled out of my bristles. I had just simply tapped it on my paper towel. And then as soon as I put it down on the paper, I had this pool of water. Now I can pick that up a couple of ways. I can either pick it up with my paper towel, as I just mentioned, or I can tap my brush again, put it onto a paper towel, put it on to my cardstock and draw that water back up. But it's just a good habit to get into to dry it at the base of the bristles as opposed to the tip of the brush. So I also have these Zig Clean colors scribbled over on a laminated sheet of cardstock next to me, and I'm picking up color from those and going back to the paper. Now at this point, my brush is even drier yet because I'm trying to get as much of that pigment on there as I can. Here's at the point where I'm pretty unhappy with this. I can see some of the red undertone in that brown of that dog, and I don't care for it. So I am going to switch to another color, and you could just bring in another color. I'm going to go a little bit darker, and you could absolutely leave it. In fact, I'm going to walk you through this as is, and you can definitely decide if you want to just strictly watercolor and leave it as is. By the time I was done with it, I didn't care for it that much. Now, it could be me. It could definitely be the fact that I haven't watercolored in ages. It could be that I haven't used my zigs in ages and I'm out of practice with them. It could be a lot of things. I chose to fix it, but I wanted you to see all of this so you can decide for yourself. So right now, I'm just going to leave that dog the way he is. I'm not going to do any more work on him for now. And on the next card, I'm going to show you something a little bit different. On this one, I concentrated completely on the dog till I had it pretty much where I wanted it. Then I move on to the doghouse. On the other card, I do something slightly different. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Here was my second problem. I wanted this doghouse to be red. Again, I didn't have any swatches. I didn't bother to swatch any of these, and I should have. So I wanted this doghouse to be red. I know that it's going to have some shadow underneath the eave here. It doesn't need to, but I wanted it to look like there was a little bit of an eave hanging over the entrance to this doghouse. So I want it to be darker up at the top, around or up underneath that eave. It needs to be a little bit darker here at the ground, behind that grass, underneath that little flower there. So I'm mapping it out with, quote, my darkest color, and then I'm bringing in a little bit lighter color and I'm stretching that out a little bit. I think a combination of a couple things here. A, I could have just completely skipped the lighter color. And B, for me, this wasn't dark enough. Once the water touches it, it kind of goes to almost this bright electric red that I didn't care too much for. I know some folks don't have the entire set of Zig Clean colors, and this might actually come in really handy for you. So you can use what you have on hand and then bring in another medium to get it where you want it. And that is also the other thing I was working with today. I only have so many zigs because I don't watercolor very often. I don't own all of them. So I decided to go this route. Now, the other thing that you could do is, so I'm coloring this doghouse in red and I need some deeper shadow areas. I could bring in another zig. I could bring in another color. My only reservation with that today was because I didn't have these swatched out and because I didn't take the time to swatch them out. I didn't want to start coloring on this, add another color, and really decide that I didn't like it. So I was pretty much thinking at this point how I was going to fix this with a medium that I knew would work well with it. We're going to start talking about that more here soon. So now that I pretty much decided that I'm going to do something different with this doghouse, I'm going to, for the most part, I'm going to leave this. What I am going to do is one more thing. I'm going to bring in my darkest red because that one seems to be the less what's the word I'm looking for? Electric to me. So I am going to bring in my darker one, and I'm pretty much just going to go over the top of everything I had already done. So I know I'm going to be bringing in my colored pencils, and I could add those highlights back in there with that. And then I know that I'm going to get a more solid color and get to the highlights and the shadows that I'm looking for. I just need a more consistent, little bit darker red there in the background. Now, if you don't want to bring in colored pencils or Copics or anything like that, I would still let this dry back, and then I would go back over it with, you could even go back over it with the same darker red, just build those layers up until you get the depth that you want to. Again, it's something I decided not to do today, but you could definitely do that if you wanted to stick strictly to watercoloring. So now I need to color in this little entryway here, and I'm going to keep this ridiculous simple. I'm starting with a dark gray zig, then I bring in a medium and stretch those shadows out a little bit more, and then I bring in a lighter, and then I just blend it out with water. On those shingles, I used the same brown, the same dark brown that I had used on the dog, and just barely went in with the tip of my watercolor brush to stretch that out a little bit. I know that I'm going to be adding more detail to that here in just a moment. If you're not going to use anything over the top of it, you could leave them just as they are right now. They actually have a really nice amount of highlight and shadow. And I don't bring that darkest brown all the way to the tips of those shingles either. I do leave some white space. And when the eye catches it, it looks like there's just highlight and shadow. I'm going to use the same grays here on up underneath this eave because I wanted this to look white. So I'm just barely adding a little bit of color, and then I stretch that out with my water and call it good and make sure that there's plenty of white space there. So now I'm going to color in the ground. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to map out where I want this ground to go before I erase my pencil. Now I'm making sure that I'm not going over any of that pencil because I do need to be able to erase it. If I could talk, that would be super duper as well. So I need to be able to erase it. So once I get it kind of planned out there, I can erase those lines and then I can finish my coloring. Now I can just barely see right there underneath the doghouse how far down that line went. I don't want to cross that line because I do want to give myself a little bit of a border around the card when it's finished so everything looks even. So I'm not going to bring that all the way down to the bottom of the card. In fact, I almost reach where that line would have been, and then I call it good. So I went in with the light green, a dark green, a little bit of a mid-tone green, and now I'm going to spread this out with my watercolor brush. I don't have a lot of water on it. It looks like I do, but I don't. Zigs spread really well, and I'm using that to my advantage. I'm also making sure that it's nice and loose and it's not completely mixed together. I want the variations in those greens. So this is the other card. I had initially gone in and just did a base layer of all of the color. I didn't add any special shadows or anything like that. I colored it from beginning to end in just a very, very simple base layer. Once I had everything watercolored, now I'm going back in and I'm adding those darker shadow colors. These are the same colors with the exception of the doghouse. These are the same colors that I used on the previous card. And I really wanted to show you this one because this is actually my favorite approach to watercoloring. I like to go in with that base coat, just do all of the images all at once, let them dry back. Then I get a really good idea of where I'm going with my colors, what they look like, what I need to address, and things like that. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. Now, again, I have my zigs scribbled over on a piece of laminated cardstock, and I'm picking those up with my brush. I have very little water in this brush. I need just enough water that I can pick those colors up off that cardstock so they'll actually pick up off the cardstock, and then I can bring them over to my paper. And at this point, I'm just going to keep building those up. Now, with the traditional watercolor, or I say traditional watercolor, in this type of traditional watercoloring, this is all you would need to do. You could do this and walk away from it. It looks really cool. One of the benefits of watercoloring is it doesn't have to look perfect. You can have those variations in colors. You can have those hard lines. You can have those soft lines, and it still makes for a really great picture. I love that about watercolor. My problem is I didn't love how these colors were working for this particular watercolor. Outside of that, you get a really great effect with it, and you can totally do it, totally walk away from it, and it would be just fine. Okay, so I'm kind of skipping all over the place because as I work on one area and I move on to another, I want to make sure that I move on to an area that is not next to the one I had just worked on. I want to let those dry back a little bit, and I don't want the colors to bleed into one another. So when you add wet next to wet, it could definitely start bleeding, and I definitely want to avoid that because I'm already having such a hard enough time with these colors as it is. I don't want to make any more work for myself. So I'm just kind of skipping all over the place. Now, his little face got a little dark there, so I dampened it with my brush, brought up some of that pigment with my paper towel, and then spread it out just a little bit more, but a wee bit lighter with my brush. So this is where I start bringing in my colored pencils. Now the blue on this doghouse isn't as bad. I could definitely leave that just the way it is, but I figured since I was going to be going back and redoing that red one anyways, I might as well do the blue one. So my card panel is completely dry. I had let it set for quite a while, probably about 2 hours. Now I'm bringing in those pencils, and I'm just using a very, very light hand. And I do have this sped up pretty fast because when I use colored pencils, I take my time. And that's good. That's exactly what you should do. But I didn't want to make you sit through all of this, so I have it super sped up. But I am working in very, very tight circular motions with a super light hand. This is the Indigo, a Prismacolored pencil, so it's a pretty dark pencil on its own. And that's exactly what I wanted. But I don't need to lay down a lot of pigment to begin with, so I can keep my hand lighter. If I want to go in darker, I can always go back over that and make it darker. Again, if you've watched my last couple videos, you're probably familiar with this already. So I'm going to go right up underneath that Eve with a dark gray pencil to kind of knock back some more of that blue. I did like the Indigo. I could have totally left it at that, but I decided to go in just a teensy weensy bit with that dark gray. Now I'm going to spread out that Indigo a little bit more because I still want this watercolor to show through, but I want some of that texture on my little dog house here. And by going over that lightly, bringing it down just a little bit more, I get some of that texture. Now we can leave it as that. Now look how much darker that is underneath that Eve. That's perfect. And then also you can see the wood grain a little bit better too. So now I'm bringing in a dark green pencil and I'm going right up underneath that dog because he would have a cast shadow, and I'm keeping it pretty close to him because he is laying right there directly on the ground. There's no space between him and the ground, so it needs to be closer to him. And as soon as I had that dark green down where I wanted it to, I'm bringing in this lighter green. This lighter green is almost an exact match for my mid-tone green there. Now I'm bringing in a red pencil, and I will have all of my zigs and my colored pencils listed down in the description below, as well as over on my blog if you're interested in them. And I'm going to make his ears just a wee bit darker. They probably shouldn't be this pink, but I sure like the pink on these little brown puppies, so that's what I'm doing. I do bring in my white pencil after I bring in that red one for no other reason than I was completely and totally lazy and did not want to get up and get a different color, so I'm making my own. I bring in that red pencil, go over with the white, and then a little bit more with that red, and I get the perfect pink. And again, I'm doing all of this with a super light hand, folks. Now I'm bringing in my darker brown pencils and a lighter colored brown pencil, and I'm just going to reinforce those shadows and those highlights. Now the trick here is I still want a lot of that watercolor to show through. Now I have a good base because of the watercolor, but I still want to see watercolor, so I'm not coloring over the top of everything. I believe somebody last week asked me if I do color over everything, and the answer is this: it depends. On the last card I did, yes, I colored almost over everything. On this one, no, I'm letting a lot of that watercolor show through because, again, this is, after all, a watercolored card. So now that I have all of my coloring done, I did the same thing on the other card. I am going to stamp my sentiments. You could leave them just like this. You don't need to put sentiments on them. I am going to put them on there because I actually need a couple of birthday cards, and I love, love, love these. This is from the In a Word Happy stamp set. There are several different styles of lettering on those stamp sets. So I'm going to use the little scripty one here, but you could use the more solid one. There's a thinner one yet that you could use on this. All three of them would be perfect. I liked in particular how this one looked because it kind of fit in really well right around the shape of that little puppy. And then on the other card, it fit nicely around the shape of the doghouse. So I'm going to be stamping these with a VersaFine Onyx Black ink because I want to make sure I have a really nice, crisp impression. This will work a little bit better than the My Favorite Things will because it is a little bit crisper. It stamps a little bit better out the gate because it is a pigment ink. And I'm going to let those dry. You could emboss those if you would like, but I'm just going to let them dry back as they are. Now I have some Copic glitter pins, and I'm going to add a little bit of more color to these butterflies. On the blue butterfly, I use a blue gold glitter pin. On this one, it's a red, and I'm just tapping in some of that color and kind of letting it fade out. It's kind of hard to see here in the video. You could probably get a little bit better idea on the finished card in the pictures. I also color in the center of those little flowers with some yellow. And then I actually brought in a light gray colored pencil to color in just around the centers of those flowers so it looked like they had their own depth and dimension. On this one, I actually forgot. I do end up bringing in a light pink Copic glitter pen because I wanted to brighten up those wings on that red butterfly a little bit more, but outside of that, I leave it. I do use a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen. This is a glaze pen. I go over their eyes on both of the puppies because I want them to stand out a little bit more, as well as the noses and then the centers of those butterflies. I don't show you, but I use a white gel pen to bring back the highlights on their little itty bitty noses there. And that is it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. I have more details and links down in the description below, as well as over at the Winnie and Walter blog and my blog, The Pink Envelope. I am going to be doing a giveaway over on my blog, courtesy of Winnie and Walter. It is a $30 gift card to Winnie and Walter, and all you need to do is leave a comment on my blog telling me which one of these four in the series was your favorite. You have until Tuesday, May 29th, 2018, 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and I will announce a winner on my blog on Wednesday, May 30th, 2018. I hope you enjoyed my card today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.